Good morning, everyone. We are here today pursuant to Standing Order 1082 to start a study of the status of emergency response to offshore oil and gas drilling and the adequacy of the current regulatory regime. We have two panels today. The first panel we have scheduled for about 45 minutes. Then we have a larger panel for the last hour and a quarter. So we'll start right away, so we give the maximum amount of time to the members for questions and for answers. With the first panel from the National Energy Board, we have Gaétan Caron, Chair and Chief Executive Officer, welcome, and Bharat Dixit, Team Leader, Conservation of Resources, welcome. So if gentlemen, go ahead with your presentation, somewhere around 8 minutes, I hope, yes. And then we'll get directly to the questions and comments. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The National Energy Board is the federal regulator for offshore oil and gas drilling and production in Canada. At the same time, the areas offshore Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador are administered by joint federal-provincial offshore petroleum boards. The NEB has a close working relationship with both of the two offshore boards and other regulators in Canada and around the world. When an accident happens anywhere, we learn from each other. This is considered standard operating procedure for all safety regulators. We have been also working with land claim agencies such as the Inuvialuit Game Council and communities potentially affected by Mackenzie Delta and Beaufort Sea drilling for the past 20 years. The most recent authorization for offshore drilling issued by the board was for Devon Pactoa C60. This exploratory oil well was drilled in about 11 meters of water between December 05 and March 06. The previous offshore well drilled in this area was the Imperial Eastern I-15 well in 1989. This was also a shallow oil well drilled in only about 10 meters of water. The earliest possible date future drilling may occur in the Beaufort Sea if the NEB approves it is 2014 for activity in about 700 meters of water. And this contrasts with the BP Macondo MC-252 in the Gulf of Mexico at 1,500 meters, which is the subject of the current emergency response. There are currently no active authorizations or approvals for offshore exploration or production activities under the board's jurisdiction. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui en raison d'un accident très grave.
What brings us here today is an accident of major proportions in the Gulf of Mexico. The NEB is actively monitoring this situation. The focus now is to stop the leak and protect the environment. Once this is done, people will be able to focus on explaining what happened, why, and what has been learned. On Tuesday, May 11th, the board announced that it is starting a review of Arctic safety and environmental offshore drilling requirements in light of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Full details of this review will be announced, and this process will be public and consultative.
Canada Oil and Gas Operations Act, known as COGOA, and parts of the Canada Petroleum Resources Act, known as CPRA, along with the Canada Oil and Gas Drilling and Production Regulations. These have very strong wording. These acts call on the NEB to ensure that oil and gas activities are safe, protect the environment, and conserve oil and gas resources when considering whether to grant an authorization or not. Before any project is approved, the NEB must satisfy itself that the operator's drilling plans include robust safety, emergency response, and environmental protection plans which meets the board's high standards. To make sure we meet the strict requirements of the Act, the NEB relies on a team of skilled and experienced experts. The NEB has 85 people focused entirely on safety, engineering, environment, geoscience, socioeconomic, and lands. NEB staff review every single application to make sure that workers and the public will be safe and the environment will be protected. En plus de veiller à ce que les demandes soient conformes.
In addition to making sure that applications meet the requirements of the Act and its regulations, NEB staff conduct stringent environmental assessments to make sure that projects under our jurisdiction comply with the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. An authorization for drilling and production activities will not be granted unless a comprehensive environmental assessment has been completed. Any project that is approved by the NEB is subjected to a number of conditions in areas such as safety, the environment, and emergency response. To make sure operators comply with these conditions, NEB staff are out in the field conducting inspections and auditing the company's management plans.
Needs also to obtain a certificate of fitness from an independent certifying authority to ensure that the vessel and drilling equipment are appropriate, in good condition, and capable of undertaking the proposed activity. When drilling has been approved, if the board is not satisfied that an operator is living up to its commitments, the acts administered by the board allow the NEB to take over the management and control of any work or activity. The act provides for a fine of up to $1 million, imprisonment for up to 5 years, or both. The board can also suspend or revoke an authorization for failure to comply with provisions of the act, regulations, or authorization. In the case of spills or incidents under the board's jurisdiction, the NEB is the lead federal agency. The operator is fully accountable and responsible for spills and damage. A critical requirement under board's legislation is the need for companies to provide a proposed emergency response and contingency plan, and the board assesses these plans before any authorization to drill can be issued. The board also has emergency response management programs, and our staff have participated in 22 spill response exercises over the past 5 years. My speaking notes have a number of examples, and I'll just refer to them here. I'll just outline the first one, which is actually happening today in Inuvik. Today there is an orientation and communication exercise for a Beaufort Sea oil spill, which is just one of the examples of the many things that must happen as we move towards the possibility of offshore drilling in the Beaufort Sea. On liability, NEB-regulated companies are fully responsible for anticipating, preventing, mitigating, and managing incidents for oil spills of any size or duration. If there is a hydrocarbon spill and the operator is at fault, they are 100% responsible for paying for all of the costs and damages. There is no limit to how much they would have to pay. If there is a hydrocarbon spill and the operator is not at fault, they are still responsible for paying for the costs and damages up to a limit of $40 million in that situation. Before drilling, the operator must provide the NEB with financial security. The security is available to the NEB to cover the cost of a potential cleanup. The National Energy Board determines the amount of the security deposit, and there is no set maximum amount. In addition, under the terms of the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, an operator is responsible for restoring damage to wildlife and compensating Inuvialuit hunters, trappers, and fishers for their loss of subsistence or commercial harvesting opportunities. The NEB may require the operator to provide financial security for this amount up front. En conclusion, l'objet de...
In closing, the purpose of my testimony here today is to tell you why we at the National Energy Board believe that we have in place both an adequate regulatory framework and the necessary emergency response assets. At the same time, we have a fundamental responsibility to review the lessons learned from the Deepwater Horizon accident in the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. for what is a very helpful start to our study. This is an issue which is obviously not only important to those of us here, but to all Canadians, and the importance of the regulator in that process I don't think can be overstated. So thank you very much. We'll go directly now to questions, starting with Mr. Regan for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Bagnall. First of all, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup d'être venu aujourd'hui. Nous l'apprécions beaucoup.
Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
The operator being fully accountable and responsible for spills and damage. And that's an important principle. Of course, in the case of the Gulf of Mexico and what's happening there, I'm sure it's not much comfort. People who are worried about what's happening in the marshlands and the wetlands and the vast area that's being affected by this, whether it's the shrimp boat captains, kind of a Forrest Gump thing, or whoever it may be, people are being affected by this, wildlife's being affected, the long-term impacts are enormous. So, you know, we have a situation where BP apparently had blowout preventers that obviously didn't work. And in a case like, so I mean, why should we feel any more comfort whatsoever in our case than they did? The fact that they're accountable and responsible for it, for paying for it, that's good, but I think people want to see, Canadians want to see that this kind of thing is prevented here, not cleaned up over years afterwards.
Mr. Chair, I certainly agree with the premise that the main focus of the regulation of offshore drilling is prevention. Blowout preventers are supposed to work. In one case that we observe every morning now, we can see that a blowout preventer did not work.
Well, the concern is, of course, that in the U.S., you know, it seems like the regulator kind of relied upon, and in fact, that the vice president of BP Americas apparently said that they assumed the preventers would work. That BP assumed the blowout preventers would work. That doesn't give me a heck of a lot of comfort when I hear that kind of a comment. And I guess I want to know that you, as the regulator, are not assuming that these kinds of measures are going to work.
Absolutely not, sir. And I can say with a great deal of confidence that the legislation that we administer initially puts the onus on an operator to propose to the National Energy Board why they believe their program is safe, why they believe the public will be protected, why the workers will be protected, and why the environment will be protected. It is up to us then, once this initial accountability has been discharged, to evaluate in detail the very programs, the very design, the very operating procedures, the very training programs that they propose to that. And if and when we decide that this is in the public interest to authorize drilling of a well offshore, it is then our continuing responsibility to inspect the activities of the company, audit their management systems, and be satisfied that the commitments made at the time of application are met throughout the project.
I know Mr. Bagnall is anxious to ask some questions, but I just want to ask you, if the situation is okay now, then why are you doing a review of your process? If we have the best regulations supposedly in the world already, why are you reviewing your process, and what do you hope to learn?
As I said, the basic attitude of a safety regulator is always want to learn from accidents anywhere in the world. 2 weeks ago, we did not know what an incident of this kind looked like in the Gulf of Mexico. Today we know. We know how grave it has become. What we don't know is what went wrong. Is it the blowout preventer? If so, was it a design flaw? Was it the metallurgy of the metals used in preparing the device? Is it about its operation? Is it about operator's error? We do not know. And we owe to the Canadian citizens to make every effort to learn from what will happen in weeks and months to come. People will reconstruct the scene. They will analyze the smallest amount of metal they can find in the sea bottom. They'll try to explain why it happened, and as a regulator, my commitment to citizens of this country is to make sure that these learnings are incorporated in our actual specific regulatory actions on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. We go now to Mr. Bagnall for about 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I'll try and get quick questions, quick answers. The clear and present danger to Canada is actually right now Greenland and the USA before Canadian drilling. My understanding is the Coast Guard, not NEB, is responsible for that. There's a spill coming in Canadian waters.
This is correct. For a spill that occurs outside Canada, once a spill arrives in Canada, the Coast Guard and other departments would be lead.
Thank you. So they would actually be our most important witness in these hearings. In the Devon-Pagoda C60, the last Beaufort well, what did they have that was more safe than the Gulf of Mexico? First of all, did they have a relief well? Second of all, do they have the house-size cut-off blowout machine that Macondo in Gulf of Mexico has? What did they have? And what did they have that was better than the Gulf of Mexico well?
What they had better than the current situation, that they were on standby, ready to drill a relief well if necessary.
Which would take how long?
That they didn't have to drill one.
But if they did, how long roughly would it take?
I think Dr. Dixit might have an answer to that technical aspect.
The mobilization of the equipment could have begun immediately, and the well would take approximately 30 to 60 days to reach.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and did they have a cutoff, the blowout big cutoff machine that the one in Gulf of Mexico has?
The Pactoa well was from a surface-based rig, and so they had physical access to the blowout preventers, yes.
And if an operator does not have the equipment, we got a spill in the Arctic, and I know the company's supposed to do it. But if they don't have the equipment, we got to get there within hours, if not days. Which federal agency or department would have that equipment? I know NEB is responsible. Would you have it, or would it be another federal department?
We would not authorize a well if the company could not demonstrate to us that equipment on the part of the company will be there to action, the response. The government, the NEB doesn't have airplanes and tractors and equipment and boats to go there, but we work in partnership with others.
I got one last question. Quick, sorry, I'm rushing.
No, that's fine.
The scientists say there's no way at the moment to clean up an oil spill after ice. It's been in there any time. What would we do with an oil spill under ice then in our Arctic?
This is precisely the question that our Act and our regulations require the operator to propose to us. And it is our job to assess whether this would be adequate and be satisfying. And I cannot answer the question right now because we haven't. But
you've already allowed drilling.
It was in shallow waters in the Mackenzie Delta.
There's still ice.
There is still ice, and there is a fragile environment. At the time, we did ask for environmental protection plan.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Is it my time?
Thank you, Mr. Bagnall. We go now to the Bloc Québécois, to Madame Brunel for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, Mr. Bedavance, with your permission. Mr. Caron, good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. Before drilling is possible, I see that there are 3 levels of security that a company must meet. In terms of emergency plans, I was looking at what you had within your standards, and it seemed somewhat vague. Measures to allow for the coordination of all plans with the municipal, provincial, territorial governments. How does it work in actual fact? Are there genuine obligations? Are there emergency or contingency plans that are specific? Do we get back to that? Do we review it? You can imagine the public is concerned, and people want to know what this means. I live close to a nuclear power plant, and safety agencies in Quebec review their security measures. What have you provided? What the board provides is that in the specific circumstance we're going to be dealing with, if a request is made, when an operator wants to drill a well, it is incumbent to that operator under the Act that you quoted to provide us with a specific program for environmental protection, contingency plans, if there were this type of a disaster that occurred. Our regulations, if we were to try to provide for every single possible contingency in a given environment at a given depth, it would be impossible to do that. So our regulatory philosophy is to base it on results. In other words, it has to be a safe plan. Citizens have to be protected, the environment as well, and we have to evaluate these matters with other experts in our board to make sure that it is in the public interest. As you say, that these things are really met, these standards are met. When a disaster occurs, we don't expect it, of course, and it doesn't always hit where we would expect. Based on what recently happened with Deepwater, do you expect that you're going to be changing your regulatory framework? Are you considering that? Absolutely. 2 days ago, on May 11th, we announced a complete reassessment of these security measures for Deepwater drilling. At this point, we're letting the American authorities continue in their work to try to contain this issue. In the coming days, we're going to be focusing on what happened and prevention issues. Any information that will be resulting from this process will be incorporated by us, and we will, if needed, improve our regulatory process. There's one thing that's troubling to me. In your 2010-2013 strategic plan, your board's vision, the board says that it is engaged in ensuring the viability of Canada's energetic future. So in other words, we're going to try to have enough energy. Are we going to do that at all costs, regarding the disregarding conditions, disregarding the concerns? And when these goals seem rather commercial in nature, that seems worrisome to me. You're quite right. The organization's vision, we have a strategic plan that is a one-page document. It has to be read as a whole. You'll see that the 2 main goals of the board are, first of all, security, and second, protection, environmental protection. We want to ensure Canadians are not worried as to whether they can continue to use energy in order to ensure the quality of life that they have taken advantage of until now, and that's our strategic plan. Mr. Bellavance, when was the last time that you did a review of your security requirements? It's an ongoing process. Each and every day, month, week, we are in contact with the American authorities, the Minerals Management Service, the British authorities, Norway. There is a constant learning process that never ends. When there's a major event that occurs like this one, it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we take a step back, look at what happened from a global standpoint, and see how we can improve things. And when was the last time you did this? In 1999, we updated our pipeline regulations because we're also responsible for oil and gas pipelines in Canada, security, environmental protection. In 99, we updated our regulations, again focusing on results and allowing us as a regulator to hold the companies responsible for environment and for the workers. With respect to high seas drilling, this is the first time. Yes, but you're saying learning from what is going on in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, I think we're facing a situation that is out of control. Frankly, and perhaps I'm naive, in 2010 I really thought that there were some technical points that would allow us not to avoid accidents. Unfortunately, I'm aware of the fact that it's impossible to avoid all accidents, but avoid these tragic catastrophes from an environmental standpoint. This is not the case. And in 1998, offshore the Scottish, near Scotland, you know that I would imagine the board had considered the issue then. There was a complete stay in all work that was being done in the UK at the time. Are you doing the same kind of thing here in Canada in reaction to the Gulf of Mexico crisis? What we are doing reflects the reality that we are living in. Over the last 10 years, we have authorized one well. So there was no need to do an overall assessment of when you're dealing with one well. There is a possibility that the oil sector will want to invest in the Beaufort Sea in physical activity as of 2014. Based on what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico, it is up to us, absolutely, to look at what has happened. Based on that, based on all of the requirements that we have and the standards, once we understand exactly what happened and how to prevent that, we of course will include that in our regulations. The precautionary principle will be guiding you in your work. Before you authorize any kind of drilling, you will at least start to try to start understanding what is going on currently. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Bellavance.
Party, Mr. Cullen, for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I agree with our Chair that this is critical for Canadians. I'll try to keep my questions short so we can have some dialogue. Is it true to say that globally, and particularly as well for Canada, that we are moving from conventional, relatively known sources of oil increasingly towards unconventional, deeper, more far-flung projects as we seek oil energy across the globe? It's also true here in Canada.
It is true generally, sir.
Yeah, so we're entering into some new territory. What happened in the Gulf was the use of equipment at depths that had not been tried before. Also, in terms of the preventers and all of the schemes, I wouldn't want to call them, that they've been using since, have also never been tried at these depths before. So in a sense, we're testing in the field. We're operating a laboratory as to what may or may not work when it comes to blowouts of oil in deep water. Is that true?
The depths that are presently being drilled are very deep. And in Canada, we haven't had, I cannot speak for the two offshore boards, but I can speak for our board that we haven't had this situation. Yeah. And as at the earliest we could face that, and about half the depth that is now currently drilled in the Gulf would be 2014.
So when Canadians read about this and watch the news, one of the questions that comes to mind is, can this happen here? Yeah. Can what happened in the Gulf of Mexico and the blowout with British Petroleum also happen in Canadian waters?
No safety regulator can possibly say that an accident will never happen.
So
it is our job to prevent that to the best of our abilities, and at the same time, as a last resort, if the worst case scenario emerges, to not have to think about it, to be absolutely ready at T equals 0 to move in. And so that's the philosophy of regulation, safety regulations around the world. Nobody can promise that nothing will ever happen again.
Right. So then the importance of having strong rules and regulations becomes increasingly urgent. Is that true?
I agree.
So a question then, and a bit comes to now the mandate of the National Energy Board. Part of your vision was written and read out into the record earlier. Do you see yourselves as a promoter of the oil and gas industry?
I miss a word.
Do you see yourselves as a promoter of the oil and gas industry?
Absolutely not.
It's interesting because I have a quote from you in 2005 where you believe that the NEB's #1 priority is to contribute to the innovation and economic growth and to reduce the administrative burden on business. Did you say that?
I said that. In the
That
context,
sounds like a promoter of the oil and gas industry.
I said that in the context of resources that our staff must invest in processes that are administrative in nature, and the necessity to be accountable to the people of Canada for processes that only take the time necessary to do a superb job.
The concern has been raised that we have been moving from rules and regulations to guidelines, goal-oriented guidelines. You referred to them earlier. In the U.S., it's a regulation where companies must prove best available and safest technology. That's a rule. It's not a guideline. It's not goal-oriented. Switch over to Canada, 2009, you moved from a regulation to a guideline, and that guideline said that the equipment must be adequate and, quote, reliably operating. This seems like a lot less secure to me, and can you tell me why not?
I will start by citing the very purpose of the Canada Oil and Gas Operations Act. Section 2 of the Act says that the purpose of the Act, which we administer, is to promote safety, protection of the environment, and conservation of oil and gas resources.
Yes,
by law, our focus can only be that.
But here's
our regulations then, I'll be brief, require us to evaluate thoroughly any proposal by any corporation to drill any well anywhere in our jurisdiction.
Yes, but in that evaluation, and this is my point, in having moved from regulations, rules, hard rules, to goal-oriented guidelines that ask for adequate and reliably operating, it's a little like setting a speed limit on the highway and saying our goal-oriented rule here is that you drive safely. You determine the speed, you determine what kind of car you drive and how you drive, but just hit the goal of driving safely. We would never do that.
That's right.
We would never set fire code that way. Why, for heaven's sakes, would we have a goal-oriented, non-regulatory, non-rule-based system for something as dangerous as deep offshore drilling?
Our thinking has been guided by best practices in regulation. The first I will mention is Norway. The UK has followed as well. Brazil now just converted to goal-oriented regulation. And the basic tenet of goal-oriented regulation is that you regulate for the outcome, as you say, the safety. Even if you drive at speed limit, it doesn't mean that you drive safely. So our regime combines both some prescriptive elements, but more and more an accountability on the operator to prove to us that their specific solution to a specific environment for a specific well is safe. And
let's talk about that proof, because in the U.S., a company must demonstrate financially their ability to drill a relief well. That is not true in Canada.
As I read in my opening statement, maybe I misexpressed myself.
They must prove financial capacity to do it in the U.S., but not so in Canada. They must, as the rules are right now, they must say that they have the ability of drilling a same-season relief well, but not necessarily the financial ability to do so. That's not a requirement in Canada.
You know, it is a requirement, sir. As I read in my opening statement, if there is a spill and the operator is at fault, they are 100% responsible to pay for all costs and damages.
Yes, they don't have to prove it up front.
In addition, before drilling, the operator must provide us with financial security. This security is available to us to cover the cost of a potential cleanup. And the NEB determines the amount of that security, and there is no set maximum amount.
Let's be clear here. A relief well is not a cost incurred in cleanup. A relief well. I want to get to the notion of same season. You folks had all of the oil companies in front of you saying that they wanted to lift the regulation that said they must be able to drill a same season relief well. So if there's a blowout, they had to prove to you, and they still do today because the rule hasn't changed, that they can come in and drill another well, as they're going to have to do in the Gulf, as it looks like. All of these harebrained schemes in trying to stop a blowout at 1,500 meters of water are harebrained. They're not working. A relief well is one of the most secure ways. You agree with this? Is it possible to have an oil operation in the Arctic in an predominantly ice-filled environment and have same season relief wells also available to a company?
That's precisely the question we were asking ourselves in response to a company wanting us to replace this methodology by something else. With the Gulf of Mexico events, we decided to cancel that hearing and take a broader perspective, not only on that device, but also everything else that makes the outcomes of safety and
So do we know?
Mr. Cullen, your time is up, but if you could give just a quick answer
I
to
missed
that.
the last question.
I asked, do we know whether you can do this or not? Can you do a same season relief well in an Arctic environment?
No, we don't.
We don't know that.
No, we have to examine that in detail with a technical focus based on evidence, based on best technical expertise around the world, and we'll apply that to Canada when we find it. We do not have that today, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Now to the government side, to Mr. Allen, and if there is time left, Ms. Gallant, is it?
Potentially.
Oh, you're taking the time. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you,
Mr.
thank you,
Allen.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being here. I just want to pick up. Mr. Bagnall was talking about before about the deep wells and more of a going to that. I just want to make sure I'm clear because from what I understood in your 2 bullet points, the 2 wells that have been approved to this point in time are one's 11 meters of water and one's in 10 meters of water, so they're not deep wells to this point in time. So what I want to understand is what, when you talk about those, what safety plans and safeguards were in place when those were approved for those shallow wells?
We had plans in place that were reflective of the simpler environment in which the drill was being made. The structure that was drilling the well was firm on ice and the bottom of the ocean. As to the details of what these plans, not in great detail, but the key elements, I'll ask, if you allow me, Mr. Chair, Dr. Dixit to outline a bit the safety and emergency response provisions of these plans.
Please. Go ahead, Mr. Dixit.
So what Devon's plans to us was that they were monitoring the progress of the well, and then they had equipment that was ready to be deployed, as I answered earlier, in very, very short notice, like hours as opposed to days or weeks, available should the indications suggest that the well was going out of control. So that was the primary one. The second thing in terms of response, should that not be successful, is around the containment and cleanup. Because the ice was landfast, not moving, there was a lot easier mechanism for us to capture and clean the ice than would be, for instance, where we have an open pack condition.
Okay. That's good because you take me to my next question then is one of the comments that you made is when drilling has been approved, if the board is not satisfied that an operator is living up to its commitments, the board can sort of take over. And I just want you to, you went through a bunch of these, but you said tabletop exercises, which is a little different than actual. Have you actually had to do that, get involved and take over management control? And if you did, how would you do that?
We haven't had a full-scale exercise where we simulated the NEB taking over an activity. As the time approaches for the potential for an application to be filed with us to possibly approve with conditions such an activity, the board would be ramping up its efforts, both in terms of desktop exercise and in the field exercise, to be ready. And not only ourselves, because there's a lot of interdependency with the Coast Guard, with the Inuvialuit people, and with the other governments involved. And at that time, we will ramp up the specifics of gaining practice in emergency response, including taking over if necessary.
And there's 22, if I understand correctly, of 22 people working on this type of thing all the time? Is that true? Did I see that?
We have about 400 people working at the board. We have about 85 people whose career is directed towards safety, protection of the environment, and geophysics and the physical science. In all cases, their unique focus is protect the public interest.
Okay. You talked about robust plans. And can you explain some of those? I mean, given that what's happened in the Gulf, can you explain some of the fail-safe technologies that are used, and how does that fit into, how do you define robust?
Yeah, well, robust is defined by professional judgment and experience. 2 weeks ago, I would have given you a different answer than I would give you today. Today, I would say I'm not so sure that blowout preventers can be relied upon the way they've been designed to date. And that's why a goal-oriented regulation is far superior than a prescriptive one, because a prescriptive regulation would have said a blowout preventer should look like this. it should have the following features. It should be that big or that small. I exaggerate, of course, but a prescriptive regulation stipulates a given solution, preconceived solution. With what we will learn from the Gulf, we will have to reassess everything we've assumed in terms of what make an operation like that safe and environmentally sound.
So have there been any discussion on any different technologies that Canada now should be considering as opposed to what was in place at the Gulf and obviously didn't work?
This is to come, sir. It will come as a result of the board reviewing what happened in the Gulf of Mexico and what we must learn from it and apply in Canada.
Do you have a kind of a timeline as to what you'd be thinking about?
The only time frame I have, sir, is to let the Americans get on with the business of stopping the leak and protecting the shores and the environment, and after that, when we can get their attention and learn from them.
Just a question in terms of your interaction with what is going on in the Gulf and being part of the actual lessons learned in this whole experience. And I just guess I want to take it from the top end. When the fire originally started and the explosion in the fire, and then putting this whole thing out, has there been any discussion with respect to how the fire was put out and the impact that might have had on the well and the pipe actually breaking?
No, we know well the people at the MMS, and we know the thing they don't need right now is a call from Canada, from the NEB saying, what's going on? They would welcome a call, yes, we're willing to help. Transport Canada is already helping with trying to help identify the location of spills. There's not much we can do as a regulator to help stopping the leak and protecting the environment at this time. We're the regulators, so we're trying very deliberately to leave them to focus on their current task, and then when we all want to learn together, when we stabilize the situation, then go deep in that undertaking.
I don't want to play on words, but do you have a pipeline for that information which is coming back to you?
Well, we have a bunch of red phones that work all the time. People know each other, and it's easy to get information. It's remarkable how the best of human nature emerges when there is an emergency. Competitive behaviors and jurisdictions evaporate instantly. People want to help. We've seen that with Katrina. We're seeing that now. We will continue to see that. So that's not an obstacle. But in terms of learning what's happening now doesn't help the American authorities and the industry to stop the leak. So we're just staying out of their way for now. I don't know for how long. Certainly as long as it takes to stop the leak.
How much time? 30 seconds? Just you said you've approved one in 10 years, one application in 10 years, was it?
That was a well by Devon. It was an exploratory well in the Mackenzie Delta. 2004 was the approval, and the activities were in 2005 and 2006. The well was Pactoa C60.
How long did it take to go through the approval process? How long was the approval process for that well?
It was approximately 90 days.
9 days? Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Allen. We have very little time left, but if we could have 2 minutes for the question and answer from the official opposition, and then 2 minutes from the government side, that'll be the end of the time. Yes, Mr. Cullen?
I think the witnesses may want to correct. I heard 9 days or 90 days?
0 days.
Thank you.
That was 90. Thank you, Mr. Cullen. And we have, starting, well, in 2 minutes, divide the time as you'd like, but Mr. Tonks, I think it'll probably go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The offshore agreements with Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador Petroleum Board and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. I understand that the regulatory regime kicks in when it comes under their jurisdiction.
Yes. Yeah.
They have the same regulatory regime as the National Board.
It is comparable with a few differences. For instance, we have no business at the board in terms of land sales and the rights administration. We do strictly the regulatory safety and environmental protection aspects. Their mandate is slightly broader, I would say.
That's my next question is the environmental protective assets. They would be activated by those boards, or would they be together with the national board?
No, in areas of their jurisdiction, they have exclusive jurisdiction. We just don't get involved in drilling offshore Newfoundland and Labrador.
You've had some simulations with respect to environmental spills that you've cited in your report.
Yes.
Has also those offshore boards had similar simulations?
I can't recall that. We could verify that and let you know, but I don't think my information here stipulates that.
I think that the committee would like to have chapter and verse with respect to that kind of probability. Final question. Relief wells appear to be the fail-safe. I know it's premature to draw that absolute conclusion, but does the NFB regulatory framework make it mandatory? If the NFB said that's what has to happen, is that the legal regime that compliance would have to occur under?
It is our policy, and industry knows that, and that is why they filed in last fall an application by letter to have us vary that and replace it by something else.
Would you
we stopped that hearing because we thought the issue now with the Gulf of Mexico required closer attention and broader attention.
I appreciate that, but would you say that your terms of reference in terms of focus are more looking at relief well capability, simultaneous to development?
Moving forward?
Yes.
It includes that as a key element. It's the last line of defense, though. In the Gulf right now, we already know that to finish that first relief well will take 3 months.
And I'm saying that possibly, in retrospect, now that should have been the first line of defense.
Possibly.
Thank you, Mr. Tonks. We go now to Ms. Gallant for up to 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you. How, if at all, is your organization, and for that matter, oil companies, required to work with the Government Operations Center, formerly OSIPEP, Office of Critical Infrastructure and Emergency Preparedness? And I'm just wondering, too, a little bit about security. Are there no-fly zones around the airspace near oil rigs? Are there security checks on the workers who work on the rigs? And in terms of perimeter security, you mentioned you review their plans. Is there a perimeter security plan for the location of the oil rigs?
Dr. Dixit has specific answers for that, if you would allow him to answer that question.
So the first question that I recall was around whether there is a zone whereby outside parties cannot come in. And so there is a safety zone around the drilling platform, approximately 500 meters around. So there's only authorized entry that can be permitted. I'm sorry, I cannot recall the rest of your questions. So if you just...
Do you coordinate with or do exercises with the Government Operations Center?
Yeah, we're very much part of that. In fact, my team leader is dealing with those security and safety matters right now today in Ottawa.
And are there any no-fly zones in and around oil rigs?
There is no no-fly zone, primarily because they are quite remote. The one that is being proposed for the Beaufort Sea is approximately 180 kilometers away, and nobody would actually want to just fly over there just for the fun of it.
And is any type of security check required on people who work on oil rigs?
That's generally done by the operator themselves to make sure that they are drug-free, they have appropriate clean records, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallant, and thank you to both of you gentlemen for coming today. I think this has been a really helpful start to our study and some good information here today. So thank you very much. We will suspend the meeting for about 2 minutes for the next group of witnesses to come forth. If you gentlemen could just back away a little bit, and because there will be some members of the committee that will have a short chat with you, probably, so that the other witnesses can come to the table. So we'll suspend for about 2 minutes. We will resume the meeting with our second panel. We have a considerably larger panel this time. Welcome to all of you. And we'll just go through the presentations in the order that the groups appear on the agenda. And then when everyone has made their presentations, we go to questions from the members. So again, thank you all very much for being here. We have from BP Canada Incorporated, Anne Drinkwater, President, and we'll just go ahead, start with your presentation. I'll introduce the others as we get to their presentations. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to your committee today. I have some prepared remarks relating to the April 20th incident on the Transocean Deepwater Horizon drilling rig and on the resources and expertise BP is bringing to bear in the spill response effort. Just over 3 weeks ago, 11 people were lost in an explosion and fire aboard the Transocean Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, and 17 others were injured. My deepest sympathy and condolences go out to the families, friends, and colleagues who have suffered such a terrible loss, and to those in communities along the Gulf Coast whose lives and livelihoods are being impacted. The root cause of this tragic incident is unknown at this time, and figuring out what happened and why it happened is a complex process. We are cooperating with a joint investigation by the Departments of Homeland Security and Interior and investigations by the United States Congress. In addition, BP has commissioned an internal investigation whose results we plan to share so that we can all learn from these terrible events. As a responsible party under the Oil Pollution Act, we will carry out our responsibilities to mitigate the environmental and economic impacts of this incident. I would like to acknowledge the support that BP is getting from the industry, from federal, state, and local authorities, and from the affected communities. The response is being managed within a unified command that was established within hours of the accident. Overall, there are approximately 13,000 people involved. And I know that the Government of British Columbia has also offered emergency response technicians to the United States Coast Guard. BP responded quickly and aggressively to the spill, and we continue to attack this very aggressively on 3 fronts: in the subsea to stop the flow of oil and secure the well, on the surface and on the shoreline. Our number 1 priority is to shut off the flow. In the subsea, we are pursuing multiple options in parallel. We are working on an operation known as Top Kill, aimed at stopping the flow of oil from the well. This essentially works by injecting multi-sized particles to plug the blowout preventer, or BOP, followed by using heavyweight drilling mud and ultimately cement to permanently seal off the well. This is a proven industry technique and has been used worldwide, but never in 5,000 feet of water. We are also working on 2 relief wells. Work on the first relief well, which began on Sunday, May 2nd, continues. As of May the 10th, it had reached 9,000 feet and is expected to take some months to complete. The second relief well will commence at the end of this week. Moving on to containing the flow, we are also continuing the work on a subsea oil recovery plan using a containment dome that will sit over the leaks and direct oil upward through a pipe. A containment dome measuring about 4 feet in diameter and 5 feet high is being readied to lower over the main leak point. This small dome will be connected by drill pipe and riser lines to a drill ship on the surface to collect and treat oil. It is designed to mitigate the formation of large volumes of hydrates. In summary, BP continues to do everything it can in conjunction with governmental authorities and other industry experts to find a solution to stem the flow of oil on the seabed or contain it before it reaches surface. On the surface, BP has launched a massive operation. BP's team of operational and technical experts are working in coordination with several federal and state agencies, organisations and companies. As I said, approximately 13,000 people are involved in the response, including shoreline defence and community outreach. Over 1.5 million feet of boom has been installed to contain the spill and protect sensitive coastal areas, with more than 1 million more feet available. Over 500 response vessels are being used, including skimmers, tugs, barges and recovery vessels. These include specially built oil spill response vessels with 2 oil water separators. This allows for continuous response operations as separated water can be decanted back into the boomed area. 37 aircraft, both fixed wing and helicopters, are deployed to support the response effort. We are also attacking the area with Coast Guard approved biodegradable dispersants, which are being applied from planes and boats. We have also developed and tested a technique to apply dispersant at the leak point on the seabed. The EPA is carefully analysing options for this technique's possible future use. To protect the shoreline, we are implementing what the United States Coast Guard has called the most massive shoreline protection effort ever mounted. 14 staging areas in 4 states have been set up to protect sensitive shorelines. We have rapid response teams ready to deploy to any affected areas to assess the type and quantity of oiling so the most effective cleaning strategies can be applied. The community response has been superb. We have 1,000 local vessels contracted for a variety of tasks, and more than 4,000 volunteers have been trained to assist. We intend to do everything in our power to bring this well under control and to mitigate the environmental impact of the spill. I can assure you that we and the entire industry will learn from this terrible event and emerge from it stronger, smarter and safer. This concludes my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Drinkwater. We will now go to the second presentation. That's from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And we have with us today David Price, Vice President of Operations. Welcome. And Paul Barnes, Manager, Atlantic Canada. Welcome, gentlemen. If you could go ahead with your presentation of somewhere around 8 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. As a Canadian association, we're able to provide broad industry views on the policy and regulation, as well as information on the information on the state of the industry. We're not able to talk, obviously, about the circumstances of the Gulf of Mexico. We're not, as I say, we're a Canadian organization, nor are we able to speak specifically to company plans. CAP appreciates the opportunity to convey our initial thoughts both on the emergency response assets and on the current policy and regulatory regime for offshore oil and gas drilling and production, as noted in the committee's invitation to appear. We're also prepared to contribute further information as may be required or useful as this study proceeds. CAP and its members certainly believe that the incident of the Gulf of Mexico is a tragic and unfortunate event, and is in the interest of all stakeholders that we collectively take the time to consider the findings and recommendations arising from this investigation of the incident. This measured approach will allow us to fully understand the circumstances under which this incident occurred and assess whether there is an opportunity to improve our regulatory system or the industry operating practices. Canadians, governments and industry all have a vested interest in achieving the right outcomes from this study. Our key themes for this study for today: to provide some context, the International Energy Agency projects world energy demand to grow by about 40% over the next 20 years, with crude oil and natural gas expected to meet 40% of that growth in demand. Global offshore crude oil production represents about 38% of the world's energy supply, and the Canadian offshore crude oil production represents about 12% of Canada's crude energy supply. The offshore regulatory regime and industry operating practices have evolved over a number of decades, resulting in a robust regulatory system in place today. All forms of energy development do pose environmental and safety risks. The challenge for government policy and regulators, and indeed industry collectively, is to take reasonable measures to mitigate the risks such that incidents are unlikely to occur, and then to be prepared to respond in the event an incident does occur. And again, as I said, we need to make sure we take the time to learn from the Gulf incident prior to determining what the next steps might be. With respect to the emergency response assets, we believe we should be targeting both an understanding of prevention and an understanding of the measures of preparedness. Both governments and industries' focus is on prevention first, and that means understanding the risks and the measures that can be taken to control those risks. Industry approaches all activity with a goal to complete that activity without incident or injury. Risk is assessed and mitigative measures are applied to achieve a risk level that is as low as is reasonably practicable without eliminating the possibility of conducting an activity. Companies, having gone through that assessment, will determine whether or not they think there is reason to proceed, and if they do, they will propose those risk strategies as part of their application, which is then subject to the judgment of acceptability by the regulator. In addition to meeting corporate and regulatory expectations with respect to prevention, companies must also demonstrate capability to respond to any incident with a view first to containment and ultimately recovery and cleanup. Response capability means ensuring access to necessary equipment. It also means ensuring an effective management system, typically referred to as an incident command system, which integrates companies and regulatory agencies to provide and define leadership responsibilities and execution throughout the duration of an incident. Training is a key component of competent response capability, and companies are required to conduct response exercises on a frequent basis. With respect to Atlantic Canada response capability, operators typically employ a three-tiered response capability system. With respect to equipment, Tier 1 would involve company-owned equipment on site. Tier 2 would involve contracted and locally situated onshore, and companies may have their own stock of equipment onshore. And Tier 3 would be internationally situated equipment. This provides for immediate response capability and scalable access to more equipment as needed. And all this needs to be lined out before approvals are obtained. The Eastern Canada Response Corporation is an entity that provides a third-party supply of that equipment in Atlantic Canada, and it is an entity that is certified by Transport Canada under the Canada Shipping Act. With respect to Northern Canada, there currently is no industry spill response equipment in the Arctic offshore, as there is no activity at the moment. Industry would put in place and would expect to be required to put in place a spill response plan with equipment and presumably with a similar strategy as employed on the East Coast with tiered response capabilities. These plans would certainly be fit for purpose to meet the expectations of Arctic operations. And operators would be required to have their spill response capability in place to receive approval to drill or produce. With respect to the regulatory requirements, every offshore operator must have authorization from a requisite board to pursue offshore activity. And authorization submissions from operators must include a safety plan, an environmental plan, and a contingency plan. All three plans must provide extensive details on how a company will meet expectations with respect to equipment, personnel, and processes in the areas of safety, environmental protection, and contingency. All plans must meet the regulations of the federal and provincial governments and guidelines of the offshore petroleum boards, and plans are approved prior to activity occurring. The application for authorization also must include, in the case of drilling, a drilling installation, description of the drilling and well control equipment. In the case of production installations, a description of the processing facilities and control equipment. Drilling a relief well is also an option and can be pursued in the event of a blowout. companies would have that plan in, those plans identified as they make their applications. I think it's important to understand that companies don't view that as the immediate response. It needs to be ready and available as quickly as possible, but they also need to be looking at what they can be doing throughout the incident. The offshore boards from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and presumably the NEB, when there's activity in the north, would do regular inspections of the operators to ensure equipment is in place, it meets regulations, and is functional in real-time circumstances. The northern operators are additionally required to follow the same season relief well capability policy. It's a policy that was established in 1976 and requires companies to demonstrate their ability to drill a same-season relief well. We've already heard that the board is intending to review that policy and, in fact, expanding that review in a broader sense. And CAP supported the premise of the review, and we support the premise of the broader review, and I'm sure our members in the association would be interested in engaging in that. With respect to the regulatory adequacy, the industry has been operating in Canada's offshore since the late 60s. During this time, hundreds of wells have been drilled. There have been incidents. There's been 4 blowouts, 2 in the north and 2 in Atlantic Canada. I think the most recent ones in Atlantic Canada were in the 1980s. Anytime we have incidents, we and the regulators take the opportunity to learn from those. I think one can take from this that there is an effective regulatory regime and sound operating and practices by industry in place to manage the risks. Having said that, it doesn't mean we should be complacent. As such, we support this study and the intent of it. We support the board's, the NEB's plans to do a review as well. We'd also point out, and I think you understood it from the NEB, there are sort of regular or periodic reviews of any of the regulations that are in place. In recent years, the regulatory regimes around the world have been moving from a more prescriptive model to a goal-oriented model. Canada has also been moving in that direction. Goal-oriented regulation is not intended to decrease the standards or weaken the regulation. It is intended to put a higher onus on industry to be accountable for its decisions and be compliant. But it also requires the operators to design their operations to be the most effective and fit for purpose, allowing both for innovation and incorporation of new practices. Industry remains accountable for what they do, and the regulator remains accountable to ensure that we meet the goals of the regulations. To conclude, the risk management is a fundamental premise of public policy. It's evident everywhere, from rail and air travel to our road systems, so it's not unique to the oil and gas industry. The current regulatory system is designed to minimize and manage risk in a way that is deemed to be sufficiently protective and recoverable, such that Canada's offshore resource can be developed. Industry accepts that this study and other regulatory reviews that occur from time to time may identify opportunities for regulatory improvement for regulatory requirements. In fact, we can continually contribute to those reviews to provide our advice around that. So we would encourage a balanced approach, drawing on the learnings from the Gulf to any changes contemplated that provide for an appropriate level of protection while still enabling the possibility for development of this important offshore resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. We go now to our third group of witnesses who are from the Inuvialuit Game Council. Welcome, gentlemen. Lawrence Amos, Treasurer, Norman Snow, Executive Director, and Stephen Bariluk, Resource Management. So if you could go ahead, Mr. Amos, with your presentation.
Hello, my name is Lawrence Amos. I'm a harvester from Sax Harbor, Northwest Territories. I'm also the treasurer for the Inuvialuit Game Council, the land claims body which represent the collective Inuvialuit interest in wildlife. I am here today on behalf of the chair, Frank Wojciak, who was unable to be here and sends his regrets. With me is Norm Snow, Executive Director, and Steve Bariluk, Resource Management Coordinator. The Beaufort Sea, our ocean, means everything to the Inuvialuit. It means there is a future for our people to live off. The wildlife in our area is very significant, but so is the ice. The animals that are there need the ice. These animals evolved and adapted to the Arctic conditions and would have a lot of difficulty living anywhere else. The Beaufort Sea has a lot of wildlife that Inuvialuit depend on. These include beluga whales, seals, many kinds of fish, polar bears, and all the creatures that make up the ecosystem they depend on. Also important are the bowhead whales. The Inuvialuit last hunted a bowhead whale in 1996, but we still have the right to harvest if we choose. Our ocean is a summer feeding ground for the bowheads. Our relatives, the Inupiat in Alaska, depend on bowheads as a significant part of their annual food source, and we must ensure that they are not impacted by what happens in our waters. The Inuvialuit know that the ocean is a very difficult place, not only for animals, but also for man. We have a lot of respect for the ocean and the animals that live there because we know how difficult it is to live there. These animals that come from the Beaufort Sea have provided clothing, food, and other valuable resources for our survival since we have lived there. There was nothing wasted from harvested animals. Even if animals were struck and not recovered, we know they go back into the cycle of life. The Government of Canada should respect the Inuvialuit culture to the fullest and try their best to protect this fragile environment. The government should be happy that Canada has a culture that can survive in this harsh environment. Any oil spill or blowout would have a devastating impact on the Beaufort ecosystem and on the ability of the Inuvialuit to continue their traditional lifestyle. We as Inuvialuit are not new to offshore oil and gas development. We experienced the previous cycle of offshore exploration 30 years ago. Many Inuvialuit worked in the offshore industry at that time, but now companies are moving into deep waters in the Beaufort that have never been worked in before. The same concern about the risk of oil and gas development that exists back then still exists today. This is why the Inuvialuit Game Council on January 21st of this year reaffirmed its position on the existing government same-season relief well policy for the Beaufort Sea. The Game Council continued to support the requirement for same-season relief well capability or an equivalency that would provide an equal or greater level of protection for the environment and wildlife in our region. The Game Council does not support any exemption to the same-season relief well policy, recognizing that it was developed for shallow water drilling. When the National Energy Board started its hearing process to review the same-season relief well policy, the Inuvialuit Game Council registered as an interested party. We have been involved in consultation with Imperial Oil on their plans for their Iowa drilling, Beaufort drilling program. They've been assuring the Inuvialuit people that a blowout is very unlikely to happen and that if a kick was experienced, they would have a blowout preventer in place that would prevent a blowout. These blowout preventers are similar to the ones used in the Gulf of Mexico, but with more rams, which provide some redundancy. To date, we have not heard from BP specifically on what their plans are for their similar drilling program. in a licensed area adjacent to Imperials. We have been given to understand that it would be similar to Imperial's IWAC project and likely using the same drilling system. With the recent blowout in the Gulf of Mexico, the communities will likely have less faith to take industry at its word. The Council has been dealing closely with issues of the same season relief well for the past 5 or 6 years, prior to and during Devon's drilling in the Pactoa well 2005-2006. At that time, the developer was required to build an ice pad for a relief well before drilling into the risk zone. The ice pad was unable to be constructed because of the land-fast ice forming later that year, likely as a result of the changing climate. The company was granted a waiver on the relief well requirement by the National Energy Board. The Inuvialuit Game Council was not informed that this waiver had been granted, and when we did find out, the council was upset. Since that time, the National Energy Board has made significant effort to fix this issue, is more attentive to the Inuvialuit Game Council and the community concerns, and communicates with us regularly. With respect to the Gulf of Mexico tragedy, it is clear that the blowout preventer did not work. In the Gulf of Mexico, the capacity to respond to a spill is far greater than anything available in the Arctic, both in terms of equipment and manpower. In light of this, it really hit home that there is no way that a similar response would be possible in the Beaufort Sea or anywhere in the Canadian Arctic should a major oil spill ever happen. This is why the Inuvialuit Game Council has been and continues to be very concerned and supportive of the same season relief well requirements now in place as a last resort should an uncontrolled blowout occur during offshore drilling. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amos, for your presentation. Very much appreciated. We now go to the last group of witnesses today, and from the Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, Raymond Ningiuchik, Vice President, and we have with us as well Andrew Dunford, Policy Advisor on Environment. So welcome to both of you. I understand the presentation will be in Inuktitut, and it won't make any difference for anyone listening through the interpretation devices, but it may take just a little bit longer. So go ahead with your presentation, please, sir.
Thank you. Put on your headsets. I can't hear him. Oh. I'm very pleased that you have invited me here this morning to speak on the important subject of gas drilling and production in Canada. My name is Raymond Ningiuchik, and I'm Vice President of Finance for Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated. Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated is the organization that signed the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement in 1993. We represent Inuit living in Nunavut. That is about 85% of the population of our community territory. And I'll reiterate on that later on. As an organization, Inuit interests are protected. We wanted to ensure that and advanced through this agreement. Nunavut is a maritime community. The word itself means our land. But with the possible exception of Baker Lake. All Nunavut communities are coastal. 26 communities are in the coastal regions. I wanted to emphasize that. I wanted to talk short, or not too long, for some. I want to give some geographic facts to you. Our shores make up 35% of the world's Arctic coastline, 20 times more than Alaska. We include 3 of the 10 largest islands in the world. Our northern tip is only 770 kilometers from the North Pole. Inuit are traditional and current harvesters of the resources of the sea. This reality is reflected in the... So we really need to remember that. The preamble states that Inuit assert an aboriginal title to the Nunavut settlement area based on their traditional and current use and occupation of the lands, waters, and land fast ice therein. Later, the preamble states that one of the objectives of the Nunavut Agreement is to provide for certainty and clarity of rights to ownership and use of lands and resources, and of rights for Inuit to participate in decision-making concerning the use, management, and conservation of land, water, and resources, including the offshore. There are 42 articles in the Nunavut Agreement. 14 of these refer directly to marine areas. Article 15 is the most obvious because its title is Marine Areas, but there are direct references to marine areas in 13 other articles. In other words, marine areas are the heart and center of the Nunavut Agreement, and the facts are in here. It sometimes takes a catastrophe. Article 5 in harvesting and hunting. Article 6 and Article 8, Article 11, which these are the contents of the agreement. Article 12, Article 15, waters. Article 16, offshore. And Article 23, Inuit. Article 25, Article 27, Natural Resource Development, Article 33, Archaeology, Article 34, Ethnographic Objects and Archival Materials. So right now, so you can refer to those. Sometimes we wake up only when something happens. We don't think about it until something disastrous happens. Right now, we have seen the oil spills and the real serious Gulf of Mexico spill. And we are limited. when is it going to be cleaned up? How long is it going to take? And is it going to be, how long is it going to have an effect on the resources and to the Inuit of the North? We are glad that we are lucky that there has nothing like this happened we know that it happened in Exxon Valdez in Alaska, but we were not prepared when there was an Exxon Valdez spill. Exxon Valdez, and still 20 years later, it's still affecting the environment and the animals up there. In the north, there is no development so far because of our distance, because of lack of things, and because of lack of preparation in case of an emergency. So it is important that in the future, like someone said earlier, that the ice pack up north makes it more difficult because they're not up there right now. There's never been any training or education in case there was spill in the Arctic. The federal government and the water board are starting to prepare on a smaller scale called Operation Nanook. But like I said, this will be a small operation. The closest place would be in Goose Bay, Labrador, who would be able to come quickly to us in case something like that happened. And like I said, we sometimes are not prepared enough, so it is important, and we are very concerned about the spill in the Gulf of Mexico today. I'm having a difficulty with my eyes. I'm trying to hurry, so I made a mistake here. I have to go back to where I missed. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman. We are really looking at this from the Nunavut perspective, and we know that there is going to have a major impact to everything down there. Like I said, the presence of sea ice will make any effective response even more difficult. So, and we understand that in Canada, there was a regulation passed in the Beaufort, which was in regards to the Beaufort Sea, but at the same time, we are still examining this issue. And in the Gulf of Mexico, you have to make sure that we know the impacts of that spill. and not just the regulations. The whole sea, ocean, in the Gulf of Mexico is possible to come all the way up north. The spillage has effects beyond, as for example, Obama said in Alaska, he mentioned that the Beaufort Sea in the Greenland area 12 oceans, and Davis Bay recently, besides reviewing our own drilling regulations and requirements, we must ensure that we are comfortable with the practices of neighboring countries. Minister Prentice is quoted on the CBC radio news on May 10 as saying that he has discussed Greenland's exploration licenses with the Home Rule government and that the environment will be protected. We are pleased to hear that the issue has been raised with the Greenlandic government, but we would like more information on exactly how the environment will be protected. We are not comfortable with simple assurances. The terms and conditions under which development occurs in the Arctic, from exploration to drilling to shipping, must ensure the protection of our environment and the continuation of our traditional way of life. We must not endanger opportunities in other emerging industries, such as commercial fishing. There is a lot of fish up there between Greenland and Canada. There is a lot of harvesting in that area. So we have, of course, we have a way. We are concerned about this. We have to, Nunavut Tungavik urges the committee to do these things. One, endorse the general principle that any future offshore oil and gas drilling and production in the Arctic should proceed only on the basis of the most rigorous international environmental standards available. This would need to include adopting best practices from around the world. Two, beyond this general principle, support the adoption of supplementary environmental protection measures that address unique Arctic circumstances and vulnerabilities. Three, reject the Canadian government's December 2009 relaxation of mandatory offshore drilling regulations. And there was a decision in May 11th in Ottawa Citizen, and ensure that environmental management of oil, gas drilling and production contain mandatory and reliable safeguards applicable to all projects. 4. Endorse the proposition that the timing and pace of development of oil and gas should balance two primary considerations: the energy security of Canadians and the socio-economic well-being of Inuit and other permanent residents of the Arctic, and should contribute to a larger Canadian and global strategy to reduce dependence on hydrocarbons and thereby mitigate climate change impacts. 5. Recognize that the participation of Canadian Inuit who have local knowledge of unique and fragile Arctic conditions and geography is vital to decision-making on Arctic emergency response. For example, in site selection for placement of remote response infrastructure. Review, in light of recent oil spills, the adequacy of the ship source oil pollution fund as set out in the Marine Liability Act. And 7, carefully review and consider the recommendations in the Arctic Council Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment in 2009 report. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman. If you have any questions in regards to this presentation, I am here. So, Western Arctic people live in their ocean is not as the current is slower than the Eastern Arctic Ocean. In the Kivalliq and Qikiqtaaluk region is very much faster, considering the environment is different, and there are icebergs that we need to consider. If there are any questions, we are here available for.
6 minutes each. So we will start with Mr. Bagnall from the official opposition. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Uglakut. Inuit Game Council and NTI, your presentations were very helpful and I think self-explanatory. Nakurmik. For Ms. Drinkwater, and if you could be really short answers, I want to get all my questions in the shortened time. Could you just briefly, quickly compare the Canadian and the American systems, both of which you're applying to for wells? Is it the same type of safety, roughly, or is the one more stringent than the other, what you would have to do to drill a well?
I haven't carried out a detailed evaluation of the comparative evaluation of the two regulatory regimes, so it would be inappropriate for me to respond to that question.
Could you get back to us on that? Thank you. When NEB, you probably heard earlier, said that we asked why the Beaufort well was safer, they said, well, because they required relief well drilling equipment right there, could have been done right away, quicker than the Gulf of Mexico. So considering that, why would you have asked for an exemption if that was the case in the one well that's been drilled that we referred to, why would you ask for an exemption from NEB for drilling a relief well in the same season?
Let me be clear about our position on that. The NEB commenced the same season relief well review, and as a participant in that review, BP registered. And in that registration, we said that BP is not rejecting the option of a relief well, but we are acknowledging the challenge of drilling a relief well within the same season, which is a reason for the NEB to carry on and do the full review.
Okay, I would have. So even after seeing what's in the Gulf, you're not withdrawing that request? Even after you see what happened in the Gulf, you're not withdrawing that request to review an exemption from building a relief well in the same season?
The submission we made was to be a participant in the hearing. We haven't rejected the option of pursuing a relief well. I think it's very important with the investigations going on to allow those investigations to conclude, and then for ourselves and the industry to take the lessons learned from those investigations and apply them in the specific and very unique circumstances of the Beaufort.
Okay, and that might lead to your withdrawing. Okay, as the Inuit said, and I've actually mentioned in question period, the most clear and present danger is the Greenland drilling in the next few months. So, David, I was shocked that you said there's no response equipment in the north at the moment. That would be if the oil spill from there or from the American drilling were to drift into our waters, and we have no equipment in the north to respond to that. That could be disastrous.
The Canadian industry isn't active in the north, and therefore it does not have its own equipment in the north. I can't speak for the American industry. I would expect, though, that they would have requirements to have their own response capability for their own waters.
No, I wasn't referring to the Canadian industry. I'm referring to the Canadian government, because when it comes into Canadian waters, obviously someone has to clean it up. It's not going to be a Canadian company that, because they're not doing the drilling. It's a Greenland or American, and so we have no equipment in the north. That's very frightening, actually.
So let me clarify. The Canadian industry does not have equipment in the north. I can't speak to what the Canadian government would have. I would expect that the Coast Guard and perhaps Transport Canada may have some assets. I don't know that.
Okay. It'd be a good thing for our committee to know. Mr. Regan wanted to know, Ms. Drinkwater, I guess, or Cap, why you would not have drilled a relief well in the Gulf of Mexico when you build the original well, and in the Beaufort, if you can't build it in the same season, as opposed to letting oil spill out for an entire year, why would you not drill a relief well at the same time as the original well?
In BP, in concert with the entire industry, our first focus is on prevention. So that is preventing any incidents from taking place. So clearly, in this instance, the fail-safe device, the blow-up preventer, did not work. Our second response is one of spill response and cleanup. With regard to the Arctic, I think it's very important that we wait for the study and for the investigations to complete, and as an industry, take the results and findings from those investigations into the review of the same season relief well policy.
Okay, only a few seconds left, so I'd just like industry and NEB to consider my mull around the thought of a goal-oriented regime, but with mandatory minimums. And also in this hearing so far, no one except the Inuit have really talked about ships or any other way. I mean, the oil has to get from the rig to somewhere else. So I think we have to look at that. And finally, to BP, do you agree with the scientists that say there's no way to clean oil up under ice technically at the moment? Major spill under ice cover.
I'm sorry, was that a question for the NEB or that was a question for me?
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in oil spill techniques in an Arctic environment, so I would have to defer to other experts on that.
Thank you, Mr. Bagnall. We go now to the Bloc Québécois, Madame Brunel, for up to 6 minutes.
Good morning, gentlemen, and Ms. Drinkwater. Ms. Drinkwater, you said that your top priority is to contain the spill. And in your presentation, you say that you're looking at a relief well and must prepare one, and there would be another one in the future. Is it not correct to say that you would like to push the National Energy Board not to develop or build a relief well? Do you not think you should reconsider this issue of not having a relief well. Could you help me understand the distinction between the type of relief wells that exist?
I want to be very clear that in addition to in our submission to the National Energy Board, we have been very clear that we're not rejecting the option of drilling a relief well. We are citing the challenge of drilling a relief well within the same season. So clearly there is good cause for the NEB to look at the current provisions as they relate to relief well policy, the specific and very challenging attributes of and unique circumstances of the Arctic, and consider how, as an industry, under their auspices, we do safeguard the environment there.
Est-ce que c'est la première fois que BP a géré une catastrophe?
Is it the first time that BP has had to manage a catastrophe of these proportions? And if so, how did you do this? And also, following the events, do you have a specific action plan now to do things otherwise? We certainly get the impression once in a while that this company is somewhat like a sorcerer trying to do something, but there's no specific action plan to deal with the catastrophe.
The action plan we're following is a very well set out action plan, and it sits within an overall spill response plan that was designed at the time of applying for the well. So it also sits within an incident command system, a structure that exists in the United States. And these plans are set out, they're well resourced, and they are precise in some areas in terms of shore protection, and they also have flexible elements to allow for the rapid staging up of any response effort. So I believe our plans are very solid. They've been applied from day one, and as the Coast Guard has noted, this is one of the most massive efforts that has been put on by any industry participant.
Probablement que
the action plans are probably specific or precise, but it's not working. I mean, so far it hasn't worked. We certainly would hope that you and wish for you that you find some. Mr. Barnes, you represent an association of oil producers. In your statement, you surprised me when you said that when there are blowouts, we learn certain lessons from this. I don't find that very reassuring. What will you do? Are you going to improve your way of doing things? Will recent events make you reconsider or change the way you're doing things? Does this not sort of ring an alarm for you internally? Just to say to yourself, we should do things otherwise.
And I guess what we're saying is when these events occur, it's important to understand what happened and learn from them. This industry has been active for many decades. I think we've grown to a great deal of expertise, but I don't think it would be wise for us to assume that we would have all the answers at this point in time. Continuous improvement in the regulatory regime and in the operating practices are really important to make sure that we are state-of-the-art and current.
You have 2 minutes. Minute and a half, roughly, Madame Brunel.
Monsieur Amos.
Mr. Amos, good day. Based on what I've understood from your testimony, you are saying that you're not against drilling in the Mofor Sea, but that you would want some relief wells. So that's what I'm understanding from your testimony. From an economic standpoint, is it important for your community, this development? And the fact of requiring the drilling of relief wells, is that based on studies that you've had carried out or research? Do you think it changes, do you think the recent events in the U.S. are changing your decision in this regard?
Maybe I'll ask Norm Snow here to answer that, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Mr. Snow.
Thank you very much. When Lawrence was saying that we have been involved with saving seas relief well policy in a lot of detail in the past 5 years since the Pactoral well, Prior to that, as Lawrence said, there's a lot of experience with Univalut themselves because they've worked on the rigs in the earlier era of offshore exploration. And they haven't done any work themselves, but they have always kept themselves apprised of what the difficulties are in having to drill a relief well in the same season. It's not, as you're probably aware, it's not really a very straightforward matter. The policy was designed for shallow water wells, such as the land-fast ice wells that have been talked about earlier on in these hearings. In deep water, the season is intended to be longer than 1 year, and it's rather difficult to apply sort of holus bolus the initial requirement for relief well for shallow water wells to deep water drilling. And I think that is why the NEB was calling for that complete overhaul. And the Game Council, like others, I think, are awaiting the outcome of the lessons learned from the tragedy in the Gulf of Mexico to see how this system can be improved.
Thank you, Mr. Snowman. Merci, Madame Brunel. We're going now to Mr. Cullen for about 5 minutes.
What happened to 6? Nice try, Chair. I'm watching the time.
4 3/4 now.
I'll take my 6 with pleasure. The question here today is that while it's not pleasant, I think it's responsible for us to consider what it would look like to have the disaster that's happening in the Gulf right now happen in Canadian waters. That is what is before us. That is the question before us. Is it possible? And if it were possible, what would it look like to have a massive oil spill like is going on in the Gulf? The only difference I suggest is that it would be worse, particularly in the Arctic, that the cleanup, we're hearing from the senior person at British Petroleum, we don't know if we can get oil out of ice, yet we're asking, the oil companies are asking to drill in areas that are predominantly ice-filled waters. It seems to me that what happened in the Gulf of Mexico was something that the oil companies said couldn't happen. In fact, said it was a 1 in 300,000 chance of happening in British Petroleum's submission. Well, it's not 1 in 300,000 anymore. Would you agree, Ms. Drinkwater, that the relief well regulation is in a sense a safety rule? It's something put in place to mitigate a blowout, something put in place to allow the company to stop a blowout from doing what it's doing in the Gulf right now?
The relief well is a response effort to an incident that's already happened.
Right.
The focus that we have and that the industry have is on the prevention of incidents in the first place, obviously. And that is why it's very important to take the results of the investigations that are going on as an industry and as a company and look at how we can properly apply those preventative measures. That has to be our first priority. 2
weeks before your rig caught fire, blew up and sank in the Gulf, spilling 5,000 barrels of oil minimum a day. One of your executives is claiming it may be as many as 50,000 to Congress. Your company 2 weeks before that was in front of Canadian regulators asking for the relief well requirement to be lifted. You stood in support of British Petroleum's request to no longer require relief wells. I have your submission here with me. Do you think that was a bad thing to ask for? And do you still support British Petroleum and other oil companies' request to remove that safety regulation?
Our submission was in support of reviewing the policy, and as I've already iterated, we don't reject the option of a relief well, but we do believe with the particular circumstances in the Arctic and the difficulty that Mr. Snow has already outlined of achieving a relief well in the same season.
You said it's too expensive.
It's not a question of cost.
Your submission does say it's a question of cost. You say that the proposed operations in the Beaufort could require commitments in excess of $1.5 billion before the regulatory processes are complete. You cite money because you're concerned about money, which is understandable because that's your mandate. Your job is to maximize profit for shareholders. That's clear. Asking for the relief well, and let's get into British Petroleum for a second. Last year, you were fined $66 million in fines for regulations that you already knew about. 2005, you were fined $50 million in the accident in Texas that killed 15 workers and injured another 170. You're now facing an additional $85 million in fine. The Health and Safety Executive of the United Kingdom has cited British Petroleum for failing to ensure the safety of your employees and others not in your employment by not providing and maintaining a system of work for the control of that operation that was so far reasonable and practically safe. British Petroleum on its website claims to be a company that is rebranded as Beyond Petroleum. I suppose that's not necessarily so much true. In the United States, the President has proposed a $10 billion fund to assist in the cleanup. He has also delayed any more issuing of leases for offshore drilling until we know what happened in the Gulf. Do you think that would be prudent for Canada as well, Mrs. Drinkwater?
To answer your first question about our submission on the same season relief well, in our submission you will note that we have not rejected the option of drilling a same season relief well. We do cite the technical challenges with regard to drilling a well in that same season. Moving on to our efforts in the Gulf of Mexico, we are on record as saying that we will continue to aggressively attack the cleanup, and we will pay all legitimate claims against us.
So if a relief well
Mr.
can't
Cullen,
be drilled...
excuse me, your time is up. We'll go now to Mr. Anderson for 5 minutes.
I think, Mr. Chair, first I want to point out that Mr. Cullen can afford to...
Mr. Anderson, point of order.
Very
Mr.
quickly,
Cullen?
I don't want to take Mr. Anderson's time. I'm just confused as to why I went 6-6 and then dropped to 5.
The clock got away a little bit. Some of the answers were a little longer than you might anticipate. Have a look at the clock, Mr. Cullen. We have less than 5 minutes. Now let's let Mr. Anderson have his 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Now I get 4. Oh, thank you. Anyway, Mr. Cullen can afford to imagine the worst, but the reality is that we are protecting the environment in this situation. There is no drilling. There's no authorization for drilling. There's no early approval. We've heard this morning it's going to be at least 4 years. We have current review of the regulations and a focus on lessons learned. So he can imagine whatever he wants, but we actually have to deal with reality, and I think we're doing that. I would like to ask, and this is a technical question, but what are the present requirements for blowout prevention? Does anybody know? Mr. Price?
I guess I would have to say I don't think that this group has the technical expertise to respond to that.
Okay, I just assumed that your association or BP would have some idea, given the nature of this hearing, what the requirements are for blowout prevention in the wells. But
we could undertake to get that to this group. There's maybe in partial answer to your question. There's typically three things that are expected of the industry from at least the boards on the East Coast, either to have blowout prevention and have a remote vehicle system, an acoustic system, or an automatic fail-safe system to operate the equipment downhole. I'm not an expert on those things, but typically they're at least one of those three things is intended to ensure that the equipment functions in the event of an incident. If you need further information, technically we can undertake to provide that.
Okay, we might have to. Maybe this is going beyond what you know, but air brakes on vehicles are on when the vehicle is shut down. You have to activate the vehicle, start it up before the air brakes come off. Do you know if there's any similar type of technology involved with drilling that shuts the flow down unless it's activated? Okay, well, maybe save that for another. Ms. Drinkwater, do you know when?
I think it would be best to convey those questions to a technical expert on the matter.
Okay, well, maybe I'll move then to relief wells because Mr. Bagnall raised the question there. I'm just wondering if you, Mr. Price, I assume you could tell us about some of the challenges of drilling a relief well alongside a regular well while you're drilling it. Is it a good idea? What are the challenges? What are the considerations that need to be taken into place there?
I guess my understanding of a relief well is it needs to intersect the well bore of an uncontrolled well, so that well bore would need to be in place before you get the relief well down there.
So you need one well in place first. I assume you want the well to be productive before you would typically be willing to spend that kind of money?
Sorry, say that again?
Well, there's probably two things. One is that you need the well bore there as well, but you drill wells and sometimes they're productive, sometimes they're not.
Correct.
But do you think it's unrealistic to require a relief well to be drilled in this situation in order to accommodate the safety concerns?
No, I think virtually every company has a relief well strategy for all of their offshore plans. It's not the only strategy, I guess I would stress, is they're looking at all other ways to kill a well should occur, but all of them in their contingency plans, I would expect, would have contemplated a relief well.
Okay, there are some, this is just a final question, I guess. There are some Canadian firms who are already in the Gulf. I understand there's some containment companies there. Can you tell us a little bit, do you know what Canadian companies are doing in the Gulf to help out, how they're already involved?
They don't share, they don't share what what their operations are outside of Canada. It's not something that comes into the Canadian Association.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, and thank you to all of you witnesses for coming today. Your information is very helpful. Also, thanks to the National Energy Board members who I noticed stayed and listened to your comments, and that's important too. So we will be back to this Tuesday after the constituency work week. Meeting adjourned.